vendor or operator, do you recognize any of these? My managed service budget is wrong. My costs are running ahead of projection. We are behind on recruitment. We haven't completed the competency assessment. We are getting crucified for things beyond our control. We're hemorrhaging cash. SLAs and KPIs are missed. Too often the budget goes into deficit at project start and immediately a crisis looms. SWAT teams are shipped in and it becomes a mad scramble to pull the project back on track. Of course, the cost of remedial action becomes yet another draw on the project budget, and often the vendor and operator end up in a downward spiral. This leads to a breakdown in trust and confidence, which, as we have seen, easily escalates into a public legal battle, risky, costly and damaging to the operator, and also the vendor. All of these issues are the value that TMSconsult.net assures and releases. It protects the revenue stream for both the vendor and operator. So let's review some of these issues, but in doing so it is important to realize that many of these have been included in the negotiations, but in general they have not been completed. Firstly, poor contract structure. As I mentioned in an earlier video, for example, the whole topic of governance had been missed. Secondly, the scope of work. Definitions are incomplete. This really comes down to the detail in the solution architecture. Thirdly, resourcing delays. To deliver the service, you need the headcount, but very rarely have we seen the full complement of skills having been available and in the right quantity on day one. Competency and experience. A full competency assessment must be part of the preparation. Gaps need to be found and corrected prior to project start. Fifthly, budgeting. Time and time again we have seen economic drivers pare down the budget to the point where the operations director is forced to say, with those resources I cannot deliver the service. For example, a 24/7/365 function in a NOC cannot be provided by 3 heads. The KPIs and SLAs have simply been lifted from the operator's day-to-day pre-outsourcing. A relevant set of service measures have not been crafted. Incidentally, this has the tendency to lead the operator to micromanage the vendor. As I mentioned at the beginning, governance. Governance is possibly the most important part of any managed service project. Just like quality, it cannot be added later. The right governance must be provided from the outset. Eighthly, understanding the service that the operator wants to deliver, his market segment and subscribers. Starting out by just delivering a service means working in isolation. In this business, just like end-to-end solutions, it is essential to understand how a solution fits into the operator's delivery for the subscriber. Ninthly, team strength. Star Trek's Mr. Spock used to say that the sum of the whole is worth more than the sum of the parts. This is an imperative. Managed service delivery is and can only be effective when it is a team. There is no room for obsessive personal or managerial agendas. Finally, rigidity of process. How often have all of us encountered the situation where the solution is blatantly obvious, but the excuse is trotted out, that's not our way. Senior management needs a fundamental mind shift here. They need to unlock and capture the intellectual value that employees can bring, essentially making their organizations a meritocracy. These are our chart of top 10 pain points, the top 10 reasons why projects fail right from the very beginning. By now it is immediately obvious that the successful managed service, by which we mean the one which delivers the service and the value to both operator and vendor, depends on progressive thinking to all of these points. Where does TMS Consult add value? First, we have to review the typical project. It is usually a cocktail of the issues I just mentioned. So let us take a simplified review of some typical project budget progressions. When we review this, it is important to remember that it is all very well to talk about the latest thinking and service proposition and dismiss perhaps our topics here as being too basic, but we must remember that a house built on firm foundation will stand, whereas a house built on sand will collapse. So let us look at the stark reality. A reality which starts with a good idea and ends up in a courtroom battle where in the final analysis everyone loses and the lawyers get fat. The ideal managed service project has a fiscal curve something like this. Naturally enough, there is a mobilization upfront cost that is virtually guaranteed that you will go into the red in the first few months. After which we have the long haul first to recover costs. This always takes longer than expected as it is always easier to spend than earn. Furthermore, every unbudgeted upfront cost and every additional operational budget item missed represents a deepening of the initial outlay and a delay in cost recovery. Finally, we come to the overall profit where we have recovered our outlay and we have reached the point where there is a trading surplus on accumulated cost, amortization plus day-to-day OPEX. Say what you like about advanced thinking or the latest thinking, the truth is that time after time, the fundamental non-rocket science issues are skipped. This is what TMS Consult gives you, the knowledge that you are set up for success. The result will be close to the budget forecast, that you are not going to end up in a court, that your project will deliver, and that it will be a success story, and finally that you won't lose the client at the end of the current contract. So let's review a typical case. Here we have a cost-based invoicing revenue progression. To make it easy, I have normalized the progression to the x-axis so that the extra cost is below and the extra revenue is above. So let's superimpose the drawdowns based on the mistakes. So see the reality of almost every managed service project. For example, a $10 million contract gets saddled with $2 million worth of upfront preloaded costs due to the HR being late, for example. So what you have to do now is find back that $2 million. The practical result is that the project break-even point is delayed 6 months. 6 months of extra cost and no profit. But that is not the end of the story. Where are you going to find that $2 million from within what is already a lean margin project? Add to that the opportunity cost of not spending that $2 million on new projects because you had to put the current project right. As a result, the final profit is a small fraction of the budget calculation. Like it or not, admit it or not, this is the simple truth of many managed service contracts. Now, it's a lean margin business. These mounting costs throw the whole cost model out of kilter. The best that can be done is a mere drop in the ocean compared to the budget. The real cost of these blunders is perhaps $5 million. That's half the profit you predicted in the first place. Now a disaster strikes. Persistent flooding and torrential rain takes perhaps 35% of the network offline for 6 weeks. Without contractual disaster control in the contract, you end up in a courtroom battle. Eventually the court finds in favor of the plaintiff and awards a settlement and costs totaling $5 million. Now on paper the project can only barely break even, but if you include the opportunity and recovery costs, the final project is way down in the red without hope of recovery. Straight away it is obvious that this is potentially the end of your career when the accountants move in and prick over your performance. TMSconsult.net has the skill to stop these disasters once and for all and empower your teams to prevent them happening again.